أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلوات وتم التسليمات وأحيا التحيات على سيدنا محمد سيد الخلق وناصر الحق والهادي إلى صراط المستقيم وعلى آله وأصحابه بحق قدره مقداره العظيم ثم أما بعد. May Allah bless all of you and protect you and keep you safe and enlighten your days and nights in these barakah-filled nights and days of Ramadan, inshallah, and may He forgive all of our sins and make us from amongst those who are emancipated from the hellfire in this blessed month. So we are heading towards the last 10 days and nights of Ramadan, and in this session we will talk about the maqam or the attribute of Sabr, the station of Sabr. And patience, forbearance, is as if it's connected to all other stations and all other things that we do. Because in order to do the right thing, it takes a level of patience and forbearance. And in order to avoid the wrong thing, it also takes patience and forbearance. And in order to treat people with kindness and generosity and generosity of soul, it also takes some patience if we find it difficult to do. So sabr is kind of the wasf, is the trait or the attribute that you're looking for when you find that your ego, your nafs, is grating against you and it wants to do something else. So then it takes patience in order for one to overcome that. And this is recognized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in that the patient ones will have a reward without a hisab, in other words, without an accounting, in essence, something almost limitless. قوله تعالى إنما يوفى الصابرون أجرهم بغير حساب, in Surah Al-Zumar, ayah 11. So the patient ones, they will have tawfiyah, they will have a fulfillment of their reward, both in this life and in the next life, بغير حساب. And whenever you find this phrase in the Quran, بغير حساب, it means that Allah is not limiting you, He's not counting how much He's giving out. So it's something that's kind of limitless and up to a commensurate number, maybe even immeasurable by our standards, and something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will determine. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says that He is with the sabirin. قوله تعالى يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة إن الله مع الصابرين. So seek this isti'ana, when we say in the Fatiha إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين, we only worship Allah and we only ask Allah when we need help. In other words, with the focus of our hearts. So do that focus of your heart with the prayer. استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة. Right? And sabr is mentioned before the salah here. Inna Allah ma'a sabirin, because Allah is with the sabirin. Right? So this kind of Allah being with you, what more do you want than to know that Allah is with you? And that's different than saying that Allah is watching you. Knowing that Allah is with you, there's a i'ana, there's an aid, there's a power. It is the manifestation of our dhikr, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, right? That there's no power or strength save by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if Allah is with us, then He is our power and He is our strength, and we are not in need of anyone else's power and anyone else's strength. So the sabr then is an indispensable and irreplaceable trait of the believer. And of course there are different degrees of how patient we can be, and there's different degrees of those who exhibit patience. The Prophet ﷺ demonstrated this in one of the hadith when he found a woman crying over a grave. She had lost someone in one of the battles of the campaigns, and the Prophet ﷺ passed by her and he said to her, ittaqi Allah wasbiri. And then she didn't know it was him. She didn't look back. She was busy lamenting her loss. And she said back to the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّكَ لَمْ تُصَبْ بِمُصِيبَتِي. You did not go through what I went through. You didn't go through the calamity that I went through. And then after he left, Prophet ﷺ just left. They told her that was the Prophet ﷺ who said that to you. So she came to his house and didn't find him, or she didn't find anyone blocking entry to the house. And then she came in and she apologized and said, I didn't know it was you, Ya Rasulullah. I didn't know that was you that was saying that to me. And then the Prophet ﷺ replied back, Inna sabra and the sadmatul ula. that patience, this true idea of sabr, happens at the sadmat al-ula, at the first shock, right? When we are greeted with news or greeted with a calamity, how do we act in that particular moment? And here, this particular woman, as the Shaykh says, Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, she had an opportunity from the very beginning. The fact that she was lamenting over the grave and so forth, the Prophet ﷺ would have not said anything to her unless he thought maybe she could do better than that. And that's why he said to her, Ittaqillah wasbiri. Have taqwa of Allah and be patient. Things will take the turn that they're supposed to, and everything is by Allah's decree and so forth. So that's why he said that to her. But then when he reminded her, she rejected the reminder. It doesn't matter if it was the Prophet ﷺ said it or somebody else. It's kalimat haqq. It's something of truth. So she came and back and apologized to him because she's like, oh wait, this is the messenger of God who's saying that to me. I should have said that to them. But it shouldn't have mattered whether it was the Prophet ﷺ saying that or someone else. So this is a very difficult concept for many, many people to grasp, especially when we think about all of the difficulties many of our ummah, members of our ummah, are facing in Palestine and in Sudan and things that just frankly don't make any sense from our perspective of how innocents and children and people getting maimed, and Palestine has the highest incidence of child amputations per capita in the world, and things just of such a magnitude and of a nature that it's very, very difficult to as they say, wrap our heads around it, and as it should be. Nothing of these things from the very human perspective, from the perspective of the Sharia and the perspective of justice and injustice, none of that is acceptable, none of that is justifiable, and we should obviously be very forcefully and loudly and I would say even aggressively opposing all of this unnecessary killing and unnecessary harm that's brought, whether to Muslims or non-Muslims, but especially when it's our brethren, and especially in one of the holiest places on earth, one of the most sacred places on earth to us, namely the land of Palestine and the surrounding area from Bayt al-Maqdis that Allah described in the Quran. وَبَرَكْنَا حَوْلَهُ لِنُرِيَهُ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا, right? And we have made barakah around Masjid al-Aqsa لِنُرِيَهُ مِنْ آيَاتِنَا, so that we see the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But nonetheless, we should never forget that nothing of this is outside of the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so it takes a certain amount of patience, of sabr, with the qada, the patience with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this is happening. This doesn't mean that we should sit on our laurels and do nothing and just watch as things go by, obviously. But from the perspective of the heart, if we look to the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't have what's called al-faza'. So faza', or let's say panic, for lack of a better word, is that which is the opposite of patience. So panic means that you feel that all is forsaken, all is lost, there's nothing we can do, this is such a lamentable situation. That should not be the reaction of the believer. The reaction of the believer in their heart, or of the believers of, let's say, of the highest maqam. I can't say that every believer is like this, because many of us, even yours truly, I can't say what would happen if I was, to be faced with such a loss. But we know that what the prophetic example is, and the Prophet ﷺ, even though he cried at the loss of his son Ibrahim, but he said, إن العين لتدمع وإن القلب لا يحزن ولا نقول إلا ما يرضي ربنا. My eyes may tear and my heart may be sad, but I am not going to say anything except that which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. This whole world and all that happens in it is a constant reminder that we're not of this place, that we don't actually belong here, in the sense that this is going to be our final abode. It's just a temporary place. It's like a rest stop. We're just passing through, and eventually we're going to somewhere else. So if you consider that and think about how this place is just a passing through place, and it's not really where you're going to make your home, as it were, then whatever happens here then should not be so consequential that it's going to ruin your forever home. So your forever home, insha'Allah, for the believers is paradise. And where none of these things that we have to be patient with will be present. We will not have to be patient with bad morals, bad character, bad people, um, the physical things that we have to be patient with, sickness, death, so forth. Even, biting into something that you thought was going to taste really good and then it turns out it wasn't. You don't even have to be patient with that. That's not going to happen in the akhirah. That's not going to be the people of paradise who dwell in paradise. So this dunya then is designed to show us that the next life is going to be everything that this life isn't. So if you try to seek everything of this life in a sense and make it like a paradise, right? Like this ta'jil of the-tayyibat, to hasten towards the tayyibat, the good things that are actually meant for you in the next life, then you kind of, at the very least, wasting your time and you're not putting your focus in the proper thing. And the proper thing is that part of being a believer, part of being a true worshipper and a true servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, yes, doing the ritual acts of worship, but the other half of that, as maybe indicated in the hadith, as-sabr nisful iman, that patience is half of faith, half of iman, then that means that dealing with the circumstances that have been thrown at you, dealing with things of no doing of your own, something that you didn't precipitate at all on your part, but nevertheless you're faced with. And that requires a lot of patience. Now it's interesting that Qadi Ibn Arabi, he said the hadith al-Iman, as-sabr nisf al-Iman, he thought it was a very weak hadith, so he told people not to be too busy with it. And in fact, he said rather Iman patience is all of Iman. So it's not just half of it, it's the whole thing. Because as we said earlier, there's no trait of the believer, there's no attribute, there's no maqam of the believer, except that, especially when you're journeying on your way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you have to be patient with it, right? If it grates against your ego. So if you're still struggling with the ego and still struggling with the temptations and the desires and the machinations, and basically the ego just wants ease and wants raha, as the Shaykh says, and it wants to fulfill its desires and its passions. And so when it finds something in the Sharia that's contrary to that, then it's going to oppose you, it's going to fight you, it's going to say, I'm not interested in doing this, I'm not interested in waking up for suhoor at 3 or 4 in the morning to have a pre-dawn meal and didn't do that every day for 29 or 30 days. That's not something the nafs wants, and it rather have its rest, and rather go back to sleep, and it rather not have to fast all day and go through what may be some physical dimensions of fasting. But we have something higher than the nafs that we can access, something that we're trying to reach, which is the very essence of our soul, our ruh, right? This thing that we don't know too much about, but we know it certainly exists, and we know that it is the better part of our humanity. And when we get in touch with that better part of humanity, then we can move beyond just being patient with something, when we actually could be grateful for it. And then not just grateful for it, we can be contented with it. So many of the arifun, when they talk about sabr, they say that this is the maqam of the awam, that this is the maqam of the general community of believers. But for those who are journeying towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and at a higher degree of faith, higher degree of iman, then it's as if they can transcend sabr, transcend patience and forbearance, at least in the meaning that we've described, into something else, something higher, which would be shukr, gratitude, and then even beyond shukr would be rida, to be contented. So if something disagreeable happens to you, some event or consequence, then it's not that you have to be patient with it, but you are contented with it because you know it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what some of them say, that depending upon the preposition that you use in talking about sabr, that there's something called as-sabru lillah. So to be patient for Allah. In other words, patient because you know that Allah rewards the patient ones, and then you're waiting for the reward. So you're doing it for Allah, and that's a good place to be, and that's a very high and sort of godly station to occupy, but it's not the highest. They say higher than this, as-sabru billah, which means that you realize that you can't do patience on your own. and forbearance. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can grant you that. Right? وَمَا صَبْرُكَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. So your sabr then is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So by the power and the divine attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you will find patience. But then higher than this, they say, as-sabru ala Allah. In other words, as-sabru ala ahkamillah. So to be patient, in other words, with Allah, to be patient with the ahkam. In other words, with the qada, with the decree of Allah. So realizing that everything is a decree from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that even though it may be disagreeable to you, but you try to bring yourself to at least an acceptance, a qubul of this decree, because Allah is the one who decreed it. And our acceptance of the decree doesn't mean we have to be accepting of the content of that decree. And this is what the theologians talk about, the difference between al-qada wal-maqdi. So the maqdi, which is the content of the decree, is something that contravenes the sharia, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can command to something or will something to happen that He doesn't command to from a sharia perspective. Those two things don't need to coincide, as the theologians say. So if that is the case, then we don't have to be contented with the disbelief of the disbelievers, but we accept it, that is the qada, that is a decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so we don't panic about it. But then higher than this, and something that we strive to, is not just to be accepting of the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we want to be grateful for the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to be contented with it. So inshallah, in the next session, tomorrow, we will talk about the maqam of shukr, of gratitude, which they say is the beginning of wilayah. Awal maqamat al-awliya, the beginning of wilayah is to be grateful for everything that Allah puts in your life. May Allah make it so, and may He grant us patience and forbearance in lieu of that until we reach this place of gratitude and contentment with all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to offer to us and give to us and show us, so that we may know Him, which is the very reason why we're here. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى لنا ولكم التوفيق والسداد ورفع الدرجات، إنه ولي ذلك والقادر عليه، وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وصحبه وسلم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.